Johnny Carson's 16 Most Insane Moments. Johnny Carson sat atop late-night television for 3 decades. As host of The Tonight Show from 1962 to 1992, he was more than a comedian. He was a cultural force, the king of late night, and the man whose desk became the most coveted perch in Hollywood. If you made it on Carson's couch, you had arrived. But Carson's extended dominance wasn't constructed on effortless laughs, celebrity interviews, and golf jokes. There were nights when everything went horribly wrong. From brawls and stunning admissions to surprise walk-offs and cringeworthy silences, Johnny Carson presided over some of the most head-shaking moments in television history. Here are 16 of Johnny Carson's most outrageous, unforgettable moments, the ones that left viewers aghast, the media abuzz, and Carson himself solidified as a live TV master. 1. The furious author who walked off set. One of the first outrageous moments occurred when an author brought onto the show to hawk his latest book became increasingly rude as the interview progressed. Carson, known for his quick wit, poked gentle fun at the man's stiff answers. Instead of laughing, the author snapped. He accused Carson of mocking his work, tossed his microphone aside, and stormed off stage in front of millions of viewers. The stunned audience gasped while Carson remained calm, simply raising an eyebrow and delivering a sarcastic quip that brought the house down. It was the perfect example of how unpredictable live television could be and how unflappable Carson truly was. 2. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box. Carson loved his desk. It wasn't just furniture, it was his command center. So, when Don Rickles, one of his closest friends and a frequent guest, appeared on The Tonight Show while Carson was away, he broke Johnny's prized cigarette box in the middle of the broadcast. When Carson returned the next night and discovered the damage, he didn't let it slide. In one of the most legendary unscripted moments in television history, Carson marched across the studio into Rickles' live taping of Scipio Sharkey, barged onto the set, and demanded to know why Rickles had smashed his box. The audience roared, Rickles panicked, and Carson milked the bit to perfection. It was chaos, but chaos that turned into comedy gold. 3. Ed Ames throws the famous tomahawk. In a demonstration that was supposed to be lighthearted, actor Ed Ames came on the show to show off his tomahawk throwing skills. The target? A wooden cowboy cutout. Ames took aim, hurled the tomahawk, and to everyone's horror and amusement, it landed squarely in the cutout's groin. The audience howled with laughter for nearly 5 straight minutes, unable to compose themselves. Carson, with his legendary timing, made one of the greatest improvisational lines in the history of television, a line so clever it fixed the moment in perpetuity. To this day, the Ed Ames tomahawk toss is one of the most iconic unscripted moments on The Tonight Show. 4. The fight with Madonna. When Madonna hosted The Tonight Show during the 1980s, viewers anticipated flirtatious banter and saucy jokes. Instead, what they got was an on-air clash between the queen of pop and the king of late night. Madonna's crude jokes and sexually charged comments didn't land well with Carson, who fired back with biting sarcasm. What began as playful sparring quickly turned into a tense exchange that left the audience unsure whether to laugh or cringe. It was one of the rare times Carson seemed genuinely irritated with a guest, and Madonna seemed determined to push his buttons. 5. Richard Pryor's raw honesty. Richard Pryor was already known as one of the most controversial comedians in America, but his appearance with Carson reached new levels of raw honesty. Pryor abandoned his usual routine and opened up about his struggles with drugs, fame, and mental health. For a few minutes, the comedy melted away, and the audience watched something real, even painful. Carson, usually quick with a joke, sat silently letting Pryor speak. It was uncomfortable, shocking, and deeply human, reminding viewers that even the funniest people in the world carried heavy burdens. 6. The Jack Benny crossover. Carson idolized Jack Benny, the comedy legend who had dominated radio and television before him. When Benny walked onto Carson's stage, unannounced during a taping, the crowd went wild. But instead of a smooth guest appearance, the moment turned surreal. Benny stole Carson's chair, refused to leave, and began conducting the interview himself. Carson, playing along but clearly blindsided, became a guest on his own show. The audience adored it, but behind the scenes, Carson was said to be irritated by Benny's antics. It was a unique instance when the host of Late Night was upstaged in his own domain. 7. The meltdown of Shelley Winters. Actress Shelley Winters was notoriously unpredictable, but on one evening she outdid everyone's expectations. While Carson and she were engaged in a heated argument, she grabbed a glass of water and spilled it in his lap. The crowd exploded in laughter and gasps, while Carson sat frozen for a moment before breaking into a grin. "I didn't know it was that kind of show," he joked, but the tension was undeniable. Winters later apologized, but the moment lived on as one of the strangest, most unhinged guest appearances in Tonight Show history. 8. Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLucci's food fight. What started as a fun reunion between Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLucci spiraled into complete chaos. The two began playfully teasing each other, but soon pies, water, and even snacks meant for the crew were flying across the set. Carson, caught in the middle, tried to maintain control, but eventually gave up, laughing as his desk and suit were covered in food. The Tonight Show food fight is probably one of the clips replayed the most throughout the show's archives, reminding everyone that sometimes the best comedy comes from total disorder. 9. Carson confronts a heckler. Even Johnny Carson had his limits. One night, as Carson delivered his monologue, a heckler in the audience kept shouting interruptions. Carson dismissed him initially, but when it became obvious the man was not going to let up, Carson stopped the show, strode over to the heckler, and tongue-lashed him in front of the crowd. The crowd cheered as Carson embarrassed the man with biting sarcasm before having him removed. It was appalling, but gratifying. Carson had demonstrated that he was not afraid to defend his stage. 10. The Zsa Zsa Gabor cat joke. Perhaps the most infamous moment in Carson folklore involves Zsa Zsa Gabor and her cat. As the story goes, Gabor asked Carson if he'd like to pet her pussy. Without missing a beat, Carson allegedly replied with one of the most jaw-dropping double entendres in television history. To this day, fans argue that this really went down or is just an urban legend because no one ever captured the action on film. Nonetheless, this has become a popular part of Carson lore as one of his dirtiest moments on the air. 11. When animal guests rule. Carson enjoyed animal guests, but often they ran rampant. From chimps swiping his microphone to snakes slithering along his desk, the spontaneous nature of live animals produced moments that could never be replicated. One insane moment in particular involved a massive bird sitting on Carson's head and not budging, paralyzing him as the audience exploded into laughter. Carson's patience and ability to turn disaster into comedy made these animal segments some of the most beloved and wildest parts of the show. 12. The Johnny Carson walk-off. One night, after enduring a guest who rambled endlessly without letting him get a word in, Carson finally snapped. Midway through the interview, he stood up, announced, "I'll be in my dressing room," and walked off the set. The audience gasped, unsure if it was a joke. The guest sat frozen, embarrassed, until Carson finally returned several minutes later. It was both hilarious and shocking, proving even the king of late night could lose his patience. 13. Robin Williams' uncontrollable energy. Few guests could match Johnny Carson's timing, but Robin Williams was in a league of his own. His manic, rapid-fire style completely took over the set whenever he appeared. Carson often leaned back in his chair, clutching his sides as Williams transformed the studio into his playground. At times, Carson seemed overwhelmed, unable to steer the conversation, but he wisely let Williams run wild. These chaotic appearances became some of the most replayed in Tonight Show history, showcasing both men at their best. 14. The streaker incident. In the 1970s, streaking was a bizarre cultural fad, and one night it invaded Carson's show. As Johnny prepared to introduce a guest, a naked man sprinted across the stage. The audience shrieked with laughter and disbelief while security scrambled. Carson, without missing a beat, quipped, "Is that one of the writers?" The insane moment went down in television history as one of the funniest and strangest disruptions in Tonight Show history. 15. Carson's emotional exit. Johnny Carson bid farewell to The Tonight Show after 30 years in 1992. The last shows were nostalgia, tears, and tribute-filled. What made the goodbye crazy wasn't pandemonium, it was the sheer emotion. Carson, the typically reserved and private individual, cried in front of millions. His openness shocked viewers who had never witnessed him so exposed. The king of late night, always in control, left the stage not with a joke, but with tears. 16. The Bette Midler Goodbye. The most unforgettable moment of Carson's career came on his penultimate show when Bette Midler serenaded him with One for My Baby and One More for the Road. The intimate, heartbreaking performance moved Carson to tears, and the audience wept along with him. It wasn't insane in the wild, chaotic sense, but it was insane in its emotional weight. For a man who had spent 30 years making others laugh, the sight of Johnny Carson openly crying on national television was one of the most powerful send-offs in entertainment history. Conclusion: Johnny Carson's 3-decade reign over late-night television wasn't just about smooth interviews and clever punchlines. It was about unpredictability, about the moments when live TV slipped out of control and created something unforgettable. From angry guests and animal chaos to emotional farewells and legendary pranks, Carson presided over some of the most insane moments ever broadcast. And that's why, even decades after he left the air, Johnny Carson is the gold standard of late-night television. The most unforgettable moment of Carson's career came on his penultimate show when Bette Midler serenaded him with One for My Baby and One More for the Road. The intimate, heartbreaking performance moved Carson to tears, and the audience wept along with him. It wasn't insane in the wild, chaotic sense, but it was insane in its emotional weight. For a man who had spent 30 years making others laugh, the sight of Johnny Carson openly crying on national television was one of the most powerful send-offs in entertainment history. Conclusion: Johnny Carson's 3-decade reign over late-night television wasn't just about smooth interviews and clever punchlines. It was about unpredictability, about the moments when live TV slipped out of control and created something unforgettable. From angry guests and animal chaos to emotional farewells and legendary pranks, Carson presided over some of the most insane moments ever broadcast. And that's why, even decades after he left the air, Johnny Carson is the gold standard of late-night television.